sterile glass palace overlooking Manhattan. He had no time for this. His life ran on efficiency, and chaos, no matter how small, was unacceptable. The solution arrived the next morning in the form of Layla Bennett. She stood at the penthouse door, her chin held high, gripping a worn, leather bag that looked like it had seen better years. Her auburn hair was pulled into a loose bun, and her sharp green eyes were filled with a mix of determination and defiance. She wasn't the meek, middle-aged housekeeper Ethan had expected. Instead, she was young, early 20s maybe, and exuded an air of independence that immediately put him on edge. "You're the housekeeper?" he asked with a raised brow, surveying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. "Yes," she replied curtly, unfazed by his skeptical tone. "Layla Bennett. I'm here to work. Is there a problem with that?" Ethan crossed his arms, his tailored suit jacket stretching slightly over his broad shoulders. "You're younger than I expected." "And you're exactly as condescending as I expected," she quipped, stepping past him into the penthouse. His jaw ticked, but he said nothing as she surveyed the space. The penthouse was a modern masterpiece, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, sleek furniture in muted tones, and not a single item out of place. It was perfect, and utterly devoid of life. "Nice place," Layla remarked, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp, taking in the cold, impersonal atmosphere. "Though it looks more like a luxury showroom than a home." Ethan bristled. "You're here to clean, not critique my interior design choices." "Noted," she said, her lips twitching into the faintest hint of a smirk. Their first clash came within the hour. Layla had decided to rearrange a few items in the kitchen for efficiency, as she called it. Ethan, who thrived on routine, was less than pleased. "You moved my coffee mugs," he snapped, holding one up as if it were evidence in a courtroom. "They're closer to the coffee machine now," Layla replied, unfazed. "You're welcome." "I didn't ask you to reorganize my life," he shot back. "And I didn't ask to work for a control freak," she retorted, meeting his glare with one of her own. For a moment, the air between them crackled with tension. Then Ethan let out a breath, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Fine. Just leave the rest of the kitchen alone." "Sure thing, boss," she said with a mock salute, turning back to her work. Despite their rocky start, Layla quickly proved herself capable. She moved through the penthouse with efficiency, her presence a quiet but undeniable force. Ethan, who usually ignored his housekeepers, found himself watching her more often than he cared to admit. She was intriguing. A puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Late one night, after an exhausting 14-hour workday, Ethan was hunched over his desk, staring at endless rows of numbers on his laptop. His shoulders were tense, his eyes burning from the screen's glare. He didn't hear Layla come in until she placed a steaming cup of tea beside him. "What's this?" he asked, glancing up in surprise. "Tea," she said simply. "You look like you need it." He stared at her for a moment, uncomfortably touched by the gesture. "Thanks," he muttered, his voice gruff. Layla shrugged, already halfway out the door. "Don't mention it." The next morning, Ethan found himself watching her again as she tidied up the living room, humming softly to herself. The sound was a stark contrast to the usual silence of his penthouse, and he realized with a jolt that her presence had already begun to change the atmosphere of his home. By the end of her first week, Ethan's frustration with his previous housekeeper's sudden departure had all but evaporated. Layla was unlike anyone he'd ever met, blunt, sharp-witted, and completely unafraid to challenge him. But it wasn't just her attitude that intrigued him. It was the way she carried herself, the quiet resilience in her eyes, and the subtle hints of vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. He found himself wanting to know more about her, to peel back the layers she so carefully guarded. One evening, as Layla was finishing up for the day, Ethan found himself lingering near the kitchen, pretending to check his phone. "Why did you take this job?" he asked suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. She paused, glancing over her shoulder at him. "I needed the money," she said simply. "That's it?" Layla hesitated, her gaze flickering away. "My dad's in debt. A lot of debt. I had to drop out of school to help him. This was the fastest way to earn enough to keep us afloat." Ethan frowned, his chest tightening at the matter-of-fact way she said it, as if she'd accepted it as her reality. "What were you studying?" "Art," she admitted, her tone softening slightly. "Painting, mostly." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing, watching as she turned back to her work. It wasn't until later, that night, as he stared out at the glittering city skyline, that he realized Layla had done something no one else in his life had managed to do in a long time. She'd made him feel something. Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter, scrolling aimlessly through his phone, but he wasn't reading the words on the screen. His mind lingered on Layla's confession from the night before. Her father's debts, her abandoned dream of art school. He didn't want to caring complicated things, and yet, here he was, wondering how someone so young had shouldered so much. The sound of humming floated in from the living room, soft, light, and completely at odds with the sterile silence that usually filled his penthouse. Layla, again, he found himself drawn toward it, his footsteps quiet as he approached. She was perched on a stool by the window, her hands busy arranging a bouquet of fresh flowers in a vase she must have picked up herself. The sunlight framed her auburn hair, making it glow like a halo, and for a moment, Ethan felt like an intruder in his own home. "You're adding flowers now?" he asked, his voice breaking the quiet. Layla glanced over her shoulder, unfazed. "This place needed some life." "You're welcome." Ethan crossed his arms, leaning against the doorway. "You seem very comfortable making changes around here." She didn't look up as she adjusted a stem. "Someone has to. You live in this fortress like the world can't touch you. It's depressing." "You think I'm depressing?" he asked, arching a brow. Layla finally turned to face him, her green eyes sharp but not unkind. "I think you're stressed, and maybe a little lonely. When's the last time you did something for yourself that wasn't work?" Ethan stiffened, her words hitting closer to home than he cared to admit. "Why do you care so much?" "You're just here for the paycheck." Layla tilted her head, studying him. "Someone has to care. You may not realize it, but you're human, Ethan. You need more than work to survive." He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Trust me, Layla. Caring only gets you hurt." She stepped closer, her voice softer now. "Maybe. But shutting yourself off doesn't make the hurt go away." The silence between them stretched, heavy with unspoken truths. Ethan's gaze flickered to the flowers she'd arranged, the vibrant colors standing out starkly against the muted tones of his penthouse. It was such a small thing, but it changed the space entirely. Just like her. "Fine," he said finally, his voice gruff. "I'll try to, what did you call it? Survive. But don't expect miracles." Layla smiled, a hint of victory in her expression. "I'll take what I can get." That evening, Ethan came home earlier than usual, the weight of his workday still pressing on his shoulders. The smell of something rich and savory greeted him as he stepped inside, and he followed it to the kitchen, where Layla was stirring a pot on the stove. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and suspicion. "Cooking," she replied without looking up. "You know, that thing people do when they're hungry." "I thought I hired you to clean, not play chef." Layla smirked, glancing at him over her shoulder. "Consider it a bonus. You've been living on takeout and coffee. That can't be good for you." He wanted to argue, to remind her that she didn't have the right to dictate his diet, but instead, he found himself sitting at the counter, watching as she moved around the kitchen with ease. It was strange, this domestic scene in the middle of his meticulously ordered life. Strange, but not unwelcome. When she placed a bowl of pasta in front of him, Ethan hesitated. "You're aware I could just hire a personal chef, right?" Layla rolled her eyes, sitting down across from him with her own bowl. "Sure. But then you'd miss out on my sparkling company." He couldn't help the small smile that tugged at his lips. "Lucky me." Later that week, Ethan was searching for a file in his office when he noticed the faint sound of footsteps approaching. He turned just as Layla stepped inside, her gaze drifting curiously over the room. He opened his mouth to scold her for wandering where she didn't belong, but her attention had already shifted to a drawer he'd left slightly ajar. "What's this?" she asked, reaching for the stack of papers inside. "Don't—" Ethan started, but it was too late. Layla pulled out a sketchbook, her eyes widening as she flipped through its pages. The drawings inside were raw and intricate, each one filled with an emotion Ethan never showed to the world. There were portraits, landscapes, abstract pieces, all of them stunning, all of them deeply personal. "You're an artist," she said softly, looking up at him in awe. Ethan snatched the sketchbook from her hands, his jaw tight. "You had no right to go through my things." "I'm sorry," Layla said, her voice calm but earnest. "I didn't mean to invade your privacy. These are incredible, Ethan. Why do you keep them hidden?" He turned away, running a hand through his hair. "Because they don't matter. They're a distraction." Layla stepped closer, her tone gentle. "They're not a distraction. They're a part of you, and they're beautiful." Her words disarmed him, cutting through the defenses he'd spent years building. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe not," she admitted. "But I know what it's like to have something you love and feel like you can't hold on to it. Hiding it doesn't make it less important, Ethan." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan let out a heavy breath, setting the sketchbook down on his desk. "I used to draw when I was younger, before everything got complicated." Layla nodded, understanding without needing to ask. "You should draw again. For yourself, if nothing else." Ethan didn't respond, but as she left the room, he found himself staring at the sketchbook, her words echoing in his mind. The next evening, Layla was tidying up the living room when Ethan appeared with 2 glasses of wine. She looked up in surprise as he handed her one. "What's this for?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I figured I owed you a thank you," he said, sitting down on the couch. "For tolerating me. And for dinner last night. It wasn't half bad." Layla laughed, settling into the armchair across from him. "High praise coming from you." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the city lights twinkling through the windows. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something he couldn't quite name. A sense of ease, of belonging. And as Layla smiled at him over the rim of her glass, he realized he wasn't as afraid of it as he thought he'd be. Ethan adjusted the cufflinks on his tailored tuxedo, his reflection staring back at him from the full-length mirror. The penthouse was unusually quiet, save for the faint rustle of movement in the guest room. Layla was still getting ready, a process that had taken far longer than he'd anticipated, though he found himself oddly amused by her nervous energy. Earlier in the day, he hadn't expected her to agree to attend the charity gala with him. When he'd first brought it up, casually mentioning it over breakfast, she had laughed outright, assuming he was joking. "A gala? Me? You're kidding, right?" she had said, raising an eyebrow as she sipped her coffee. "I'm not kidding," Ethan had replied, his tone matter-of-fact. "You've been working hard. Consider this a thank you. Besides, it's one evening. You'll survive." Layla had hesitated, her defenses immediately going up. "Ethan, I don't have anything to wear to something like that. Even if I did, I'd stick out like a sore thumb. It's not my world." He'd leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady and unyielding. "Then we'll fix that. I'll take care of everything." And he had. The boutique he'd taken her to that afternoon was unlike anything Layla had ever seen. The moment they stepped inside, she felt entirely out of place among the racks of elegant gowns and the attentive sales staff who seemed to size her up with a single glance. "This is ridiculous," she had muttered under her breath, tugging at the hem of her simple sweater. "I don't need a fancy dress." "Maybe not," Ethan had said smoothly, his hand lightly brushing her lower back as he guided her toward a display of evening gowns. "But I want you to have one." She had tried to protest again, but Ethan wasn't hearing it. Before long, she found herself being ushered into a spacious fitting room with an armful of gowns in jewel tones and shimmering fabrics. Each one seemed more extravagant than the last, and Layla felt increasingly self-conscious as she tried them on. But then, she stepped out in the dress, the dress. A floor-length emerald green gown that hugged her curves perfectly and brought out the warmth in her auburn hair. The neckline was elegant, the fabric flowing like liquid silk, and for the first time in years, Layla felt beautiful. Ethan's reaction had been immediate and unguarded. His eyes had darkened, his breath catching slightly as he took her in. "That's the one," he had said, his voice low and certain. Layla had flushed under his gaze, her usual sharp wit momentarily failing her. "It's too much," she had murmured, glancing at the price tag. "It's perfect," Ethan had countered, pulling out his black card without a second thought. No arguments. Now, as Ethan waited for her to emerge from the guest room, he wondered if she still felt out of place. He was about to knock when the door opened and Layla stepped out. His breath caught again. The green gown shimmered under the soft light, her auburn hair swept into an elegant updo, with a few loose strands framing her face. She looked radiant, her usual guarded expression softened by a hint of vulnerability. "Well?" she asked, fidgeting slightly under his intense gaze. "Do I pass your high society standards?" Ethan's lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. "You'll be the most stunning woman in the room." Layla rolled her eyes, though a faint blush crept up her neck. "Flattery won't make tonight any less intimidating." "You'll be fine," he said, offering her his arm. "Just stick with me." The charity gala was an assault on the senses. The grand ballroom, with its glittering crystal chandeliers and soaring ceilings, was filled with Manhattan's elite. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits sipped champagne as a live orchestra played softly in the background. Everywhere Layla looked, there was wealth and opulence on a scale she'd never experienced. Ethan navigated the crowd effortlessly, his presence commanding attention wherever he went. Layla stayed close to his side, feeling like an outsider in a world that wasn't hers. She caught snippets of conversations, talk of hedge funds, art auctions, and luxury vacations, and it only made her feel more out of place. "You okay?" Ethan asked, leaning in slightly as they paused near the bar. "Peachy," Layla replied, though her tight grip on her clutch betrayed her nerves. "This is just a lot." Ethan studied her, his brow furrowing slightly. "You don't have to talk to anyone if you don't want to. Just stay with me." Before she could respond, a statuesque blonde in a shimmering silver gown approached. Her smile was dazzling, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ethan," the woman purred, placing a manicured hand on his arm. "It's been ages." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, though he kept his tone polite. "Vanessa, how unexpected." Vanessa's gaze flickered to Layla, her expression turning appraising. "And who's this? A new acquaintance?" Layla bristled at the subtle dig, but Ethan responded before she could. "This is Layla," he said firmly. "She's just the help." Layla cut in abruptly, her voice laced with self-deprecation. She gave Vanessa a tight smile. "I'm sure you two have plenty to catch up on." Ethan frowned, his eyes narrowing as he turned to Layla. "That's not—" "It's fine," Layla said quickly, stepping back. "I'll just—" She didn't finish the sentence, instead turning on her heel and heading toward the nearest exit. Her heart pounded in her chest, humiliation and anger warring within her. She should have known better. This wasn't her world, and Ethan could never really be hers. "Layla." Ethan's voice cut through the noise of the gala, and she felt his hand close around her wrist, stopping her in her tracks. "Let me go." "Ethan," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "No," he said firmly, stepping in front of her. "You don't get to walk away." Her eyes flashed, anger flaring to life. "Why not? I don't belong here. I'm just the help, remember?" Ethan's expression darkened, his frustration evident. "You're not just the help. You're the only person in that room who sees me, not my bank account." Layla's breath hitched at the raw honesty in his voice. But she shook her head, her hurt still fresh. "Then why let her throw herself at you? Why bring me here, Ethan? Was this some kind of pity gesture?" "It wasn't pity," he said quietly, his voice softening. "I brought you because I wanted you here, because you matter to me, Layla. more than anyone else in that room. Her heart ached at his words, but the intensity of the moment was too much. "I need some air," she whispered, pulling away. Ethan let her go this time, watching helplessly, as she disappeared into the night. The rain started softly, a misty drizzle that turned heavier as Ethan stepped out of his car and onto the slick pavement in front of Layla's modest apartment building. He barely noticed the cold droplets soaking into his expensive suit. His mind was consumed with one thought. He couldn't leave things the way they were. Not tonight. Not after what he'd said, and more importantly, what he hadn't. The doorman gave him a curious glance but said nothing as Ethan breezed inside, his presence commanding as always. He took the stairs 2 at a time, not trusting the old elevator to move fast enough for the urgency building inside him. By the time he reached her floor, his heart was pounding. Not from exertion, but from a mix of determination and fear. When he reached her door, he hesitated. His hand paused mid-air. This was uncharted territory for him. Ethan Cross didn't chase after anyone. He didn't beg. He didn't plead. And he most certainly didn't put his heart on the line. But, for Layla? He would do all of it and more. He knocked firmly, his breath hitching when he heard movement on the other side. The lock clicked, and the door opened just enough for Layla to peek out. Her makeup was smudged, her emerald green gown now covered by an oversized sweater, and her auburn hair had fallen loose from its elegant updo. Yet, to Ethan, she still looked breathtaking. "What are you doing here, Ethan?" she asked, her voice weary but guarded. "I couldn't let you leave like that," he said, his tone softer than she'd ever heard it. "Can I come in?" Layla hesitated, her grip tightening on the doorframe. "Ethan, Please," he interrupted, his expression earnest. "Just hear me out." After a long pause, she sighed and opened the door fully, stepping aside to let him in. The apartment was small but warm, filled with little touches of Layla's personality. Books stacked haphazardly on every surface, a half-finished painting on an easel in the corner, and mismatched throw pillows on the worn couch. It was the complete opposite of Ethan's cold, pristine penthouse, and yet he found it oddly comforting. She crossed her arms, leaning against the wall as she watched him. "You didn't have to come all this way. I'm fine." "No, you're not," Ethan said bluntly, his piercing eyes locking onto hers. "And neither am I." Layla looked away, her voice trembling. "Ethan, tonight was a mistake. I don't belong in your world. I never will." "You're wrong," he said, stepping closer. "You belong wherever you want to be. And I want you in my world, Layla. Not because I need someone to fill a role or because it's convenient, but because I want you." Her eyes flickered back to his, tears threatening to spill. "Why? Why me, Ethan? I'm just some girl trying to make ends meet. You could have anyone." "Because you see me," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Not the money, not the company, not the image. Me. And because you make me want to be better. You make me want more than what I've been settling for." Layla shook her head, her emotions spilling over as a tear slid down her cheek. "You make it sound so easy. But it's not. I'm terrified, Ethan. I'm scared of letting myself care, of letting myself love you, only to lose you." He took her hands in his touch warm and grounding. "You were right, Layla. I've been shutting myself off because I was afraid of being hurt. But losing you, that would hurt more than anything else ever could." Her resolve cracked under the weight of his words, and she let out a shaky breath. "Ethan, you make it impossible not to love you, even when I try to fight it." "Then don't fight it," he said, his gaze intense but filled with hope. "Let me prove to you that this doesn't have to be as scary as it feels right now. Let me show you that we can have something real." Layla stared at him, searching his face for any hint of doubt, but all she saw was sincerity. Slowly, she nodded, a tearful smile breaking through. "Okay." Relief washed over Ethan's face, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as if to anchor them both. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan's expression shifted, a hint of excitement breaking through his usual composure. "There's something I need to show you." Layla raised an eyebrow. Now? Yes, now, he said with a small smile.